The Modi government has made a huge move to reduce dependence on the US dollar amid Trump tariff tantrums. Meanwhile, the Indian economy and markets continue to defy Trump and remain the fastest growing among the global top 50. This, as director of S&P Global Ratings, claimed Trump's 50% tariffs won't have any impact on India's growth, which will remain over 6%, as Bharat is not a trade or export-oriented economy, but a domestic consumption-oriented economy. Meanwhile, China has eased restrictions on fertilizer exports to India in a bid to attract the world's largest market away from US influence. The Modi government is also considering reopening border trade with China, which had been restricted over the last few years after the Galwan Valley clashes. So Trump tariff drama is playing a huge role in easing India-China tensions, especially after US is also keen to play the Pakistan card, which is seen as a red line by New Delhi. But the biggest move of all is the Modi government's push to internationalize the Indian rupee. Let's take a closer look at why this is the ultimate trump card against US trade friction. Firstly, this is in complete defiance of Donald Trump's dollar diktat. The Indian government is stepping up actions to promote international trade in Indian rupees. Let's quickly look at the technical details. The Reserve Bank of India, in order to speed up the opening and use of special rupee Vostro accounts for foreign banks, has announced that the authorized dealer or AD banks no longer need permission from the RBI. Additionally, the Reserve Bank of India also stated that foreign investors may invest the surplus balance in their so-called Vostro accounts into central government securities. The holders of such accounts can invest in Indian government debt without registering as foreign portfolio investors, same as overseas investors. But why is it important? Let's simplify it. In accordance with a circular issued by RBI on the 5th of August, the new framework will not only facilitate rupee-based trade settlements globally, but now exports and imports can now be invoiced and settled directly in Indian rupees. The biggest possible takeaway is that in the future it could potentially bypass unfair or whimsical sanctions on US dollar-based trade in the future. Reserve Bank of India's bold policy will make it smoother to operationalize trade settlements in Indian rupee and reduce reliance on the US dollar. Removing the approval step significantly reduces timelines for setting up SRVAs. It also reduces significant conversion costs and enables faster onboarding of overseas partner banks. All this also helps avoid delays in trade settlements and facilitates quicker execution of export-import contracts. Certain trade partners can get attracted to Indian exports now due to their ability to invoice and settle in Indian rupees by reducing foreign exchange conversion costs significantly, as well as exposure to third currency risks. It also strengthens India's alternative payment network significantly during global financial disruptions or geopolitical sanctions which affect dollar-based settlements. Reserve Bank of India's administrative relaxation advances the broader goal of positioning the Indian rupee as a credible, widely used international currency. However, the RBI has clarified that banks must still follow all the existing regulations and due diligence processes under Foreign Exchange Management Act and Know Your Customer or KYC norms. Earlier, Reuters had reported that to boost rupee-dominated investment and trade, RBI has sought the government's approval to remove the cap on foreign banks with the so-called Vostro accounts buying short-term sovereign debt. But the big question is India's recent move a huge step against Trump tariffs? Should India also accept the proposal by fellow BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia and China, to start a common BRICS currency? So far, India says it would rather prefer trade in local bilateral currencies rather than using a common BRICS currency. Remember, US President Donald Trump had previously threatened to impose 100% tariffs on BRICS countries if they moved ahead with their own currency to rival the US dollar. Trump also threatened the world, saying an additional 10% tariffs on, quote, any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of the BRICS, unquote. But it seems no one is playing a greater role in uniting the BRICS other than Trump. Moreover, Trump has already hit India with a 50% tariff for purchasing Russian crude oil. He also accused India of financing Russia's war. Now that smells like pure double standards. Firstly, India's purchase of Russian oil are legal under international law. Secondly, US and European Union trade with Russia is far greater than India's oil imports from Russia. And thirdly, United States itself admitted earlier this year it had provided weapons worth nearly $70 billion to fuel Ukrainian war rather than backing diplomacy and dialogue. India has not provided any weapons to either side. So US accusing India is like the pot calling the kettle black. India reacted promptly, brushing off Washington's move as reckless tariff trade and stressing that it would take all necessary steps to protect national interests. The two sides are negotiating a comprehensive trade deal. A US team will arrive in India later this August to continue the discussions. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi will travel to America in September to address the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. India's head of government is slated to address the 80th session of the UNGA on 26th of September. A meeting with Trump on the sidelines between the two leaders could go a long way in easing tensions between the world's two largest democracies and arrive at a common ground on trade and tariffs. Reports suggest that President Trump is also keen on meeting Prime Minister Modi. The meeting also depends on the impact of the Trump-Putin dialogue in Alaska. A lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine would also end up removing the 25% tariffs on Indian imports of Russian oil. In another move, the RBI has been long pushing to internationalize the Indian rupee and urged the government for permission to let domestic banks lend rupees to borrowers outside India. Up until now, Indian banks could only give loans in foreign currencies to overseas borrowers. Such loans are mainly given to Indian firms operating overseas. In an effort to make the Indian rupee global and more appealing, a proposal was sent to the Finance Ministry last month. The aim is to first rope in neighboring nations like Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka and Nepal, as 90% of India's exports in South Asian region happen to these four countries. As for the Ministry of Commerce data, India's exports to Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Bhutan amounted to $25 billion in 2024-25. Now, sources have said that if this is successful, this rupee-dominated lending could be extended to cross-border transactions around the world. Last year, the central bank said in a report that efforts are underway towards internationalization of the Indian rupee through settlement of bilateral trade in local currency, unquote. Meanwhile, India is also easing ties with China as Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting India next week for talks on border issue with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. This will happen just days before India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar travels to Moscow for trade and strategic dialogue with his counterpart Sergei Lavrov. But what do you believe? Do you support the Modi government's move to internationalize the rupee amid tariff tensions? Leave a comment with your opinion, hit the like button and subscribe to Inconnect News.